In 1989, Capcom released its incredible arcade hit Strider worldwide. It was set in a future ruled over by an all-powerful dictator known as the Grand Master. Your job is to break through his defenses, take out his guards, and assassinate his crazy ass. It was an absolute tour de force of graphics, sound, and gameplay, and one of the games that really made me quite fond of Capcom's style. A year later, Sega got the rights to bring the game home to its Genesis and Mega Drive platform. I've covered it numerous times on my channel and consider it an absolute must-own. There were even a few sequels to it a few years later. In this episode, we are going to take a look at the many ways you can play Strider, talk a bit about the quality of these different versions, and even take a look at a remake that turned out pretty spectacular itself. Hope you guys enjoy the many faces of Capcom's Strider. Believe it or not, the very first time I played Strider at home was actually on the NES in 1989. For those of you that don't know, this version was not based on the arcade and was instead developed separately as a standalone game. It has similar characters and abilities but has multiple different story elements and is much more an adventure game than a straight up action title. It follows the formula of needing to find different items that give Strider the ability to get past obstacles. It plays from a hub area that gives you access to replayable stages where the story unfolds. It was a good looking game on the NES and had a fairly solid soundtrack as well. I won't spend a lot of time showing you the Genesis version because I've covered it so many times, but it was a great conversion by Sega in 1990. They stayed relatively faithful to the arcade in pretty much every way. The 8 megabit cart was heavily compressed, so you will notice some hitching here and there while assets load in. I really enjoyed this port, and it was a showpiece of my Genesis collection months after I got it. The often forgotten PC Engine version started out as a Super Graphics title, but due to that platform crashing and burning pretty much from the get-go, it languished in development hell for years. It finally saw release in 1994 as an arcade card CD title. It was developed by NEC Avenue, and despite being worked on for years and having some additional cinemas and an extra stage, it just didn't turn out all that great. Both the graphics and gameplay suffer, mainly thanks to some nasty slowdown and sprite flicker that shows up often. For what it's worth, the soundtrack is absolutely amazing. It kinda makes you realize Sega should have released a Sega CD version back in 1991. As much as I like to talk up the Genesis version of Strider, the 1992 Sharp X68000 version was even better. It is almost a one-to-one recreation of the arcade original. The graphics, sound, and gameplay all just feel so authentic, it's crazy. And it definitely should because Capcom themselves developed this and the hardware was thousands of dollars. Emulation has made access to the arcade an easy thing these days, but back then this was nothing short of incredible. If you ever get a chance to see it, I highly recommend you soak up just how powerful this computer was for arcade ports. Having games like this at home in the early 90s would have made you the talk of the town. Strider also made its way to the various microcomputers of the time. These games were developed by Tiertex and published by US Gold, and the results were really subpar across the board. While the 16-bit versions on the Amiga and Atari ST didn't look so bad, they played slow, the physics were utterly broken, and they had massive amounts of the screen taken up by the life, score, and timer displays. The 8-bit versions on the likes of the C64 and ZX Spectrum were truly terrible as well. They played slow and were missing bosses, entire sections of levels, and some were even missing gameplay moves like the slide. These are easily the weakest of the original games based on the arcade. Unsurprisingly, Capcom had no hand in their development whatsoever. Through their licensing deal with Capcom, US Gold parlayed enough control over the IP to get Tiertex to do an actual sequel to Strider for micro PCs. This was even worse than their original Strider ports, and was eventually brought to the Sega Genesis as Journey from Darkness: Strider Returns. Gone are the bright, colorful stages of the original, replaced by dark, dank graphics and enemies that just keep flooding the screen non-stop. The gameplay was clunky, the stage design unintuitive, and man did the sound and music absolutely suck. There are worse games on the Genesis platform for sure, but with the pedigree of the first being so high, this game had no excuse being this disappointing. This version has also been completely dismissed by Capcom and appears in none of the series' official storyline. As the years went on, Strider became available through a number of compilations. The PlayStation release of Strider 2 included a 2-disc set that included the first game as well. Capcom actually did this sequel, a 2.5D take on the gameplay seen from the original arcade. You can also get Strider in various other compilations like the Capcom Classics Collection Volume 2. It's emulation but runs fairly well. There was also a GBA release called Capcom Classics Mini Mix that included the NES adventure as well. In 2014, Capcom and Double Helix Games released Strider on the PlayStation 3, PlayStation 4, Xbox 360, Xbox One, and PC. This new entry into the series takes the story, gameplay, and settings from the first two games and remade it for modern audiences. It's much more an adventure game like the NES edition was, of course now with some major updates to the presentation. It's still played from the side view perspective, so it retains much of the feel from the original games. I came to really enjoy this one in its Metroidvania style design. It looks great and is a much longer experience than any of the ones before it. You can still get it easily from modern digital storefronts, and it's often on sale for under $10. Strider was a major part of my childhood. From the arcade and its many home ports, to the completely different NES rendition, I found a Strider to play pretty much everywhere I looked. It was a simple game in many respects, mainly just a lone warrior rushing enemy lines and cutting down his foes along the way. It played fast and rewarded aggression. The nice thing is that if you want a slower game with more substance, there were two very good options in the NES release and the 2014 modern take. I often play Strider on my Genesis to relive the wow moments that still really impress me. Of course, seeing that X68000 program run still makes me wish I had one of those things way back in the day. If you're a fan of Strider, I recommend you give all these variations a try just to see how different home ports could be back then. It's not like today where emulation of older games is pretty much the same platform to platform. Back then, each one had significant differences that made them worth playing, if nothing more than to satisfy the curiosity to experience them all. If you're finding the home versions based on the arcade too short and easy, crank up that difficulty a bit and enjoy a significantly harder game. Play the better releases and it's a pure arcade experience that's flashy, fast, hard, and sounds incredible. I'm Sega Lord X. Thank you guys for watching, and I will catch you next time.